And so you're an empath who wants to help people navigate. How do you protect yourself when gleaming these newfound experiences from other people who are really trying to work through it?
I think that's a really good question. How do you protect yourself energetically and emotionally when you're an empath and when other people's energy is coming at you constantly, whether you're inviting it or not? And also when people are kind of feeding off your energy, often unbeknownst to you, which can leave you very drained. I mean, all that's to say is, up until very recently, I really didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to protect myself, and that showed up. The not knowing how showed up in, being a people pleaser, overworking, overgiving, overpouring, being, constantly drained, depleted, and tired, and not really understanding why. It's even as simple sometimes as, like a really simple example is like if you go into, you wake up in the morning and you feel good, you're happy, the sun's shining, and then you go around the block and you go to the bodega or the grocery shop or whatever, and the person serving you is in a terrible mood, and they're throwing all of that terrible mood at you. And then suddenly you leave the bodega and that kind of negative energy has attached itself to you. So then somebody bumps into you in the street and then you're annoyed, and then, you get in your car and then, it's like this chain of energetic events that can happen to you throughout a day that has nothing to do with your own energy. It's either the extraction from other people or what other people have thrown onto you. But most of us are walking around every day not realizing that, and we're like, what's wrong with me? A lot of the times we think it's us. But anyway, to answer the question, I have been lucky enough to find and seek out a lot of different mentors over recent years, and there is a woman called Mariam Hasna who has a platform called the New Earth Mystery School, and the whole platform is dedicated really to teaching empaths and intuitives how to exactly that, how to kind of control your own energy, protect your own energy, and share it lovingly, but in a way that keeps you safe, basically. So what does that look like? I mean, sometimes it's as simple as things like smudging. I've got smudge sticks all over my apartment. Smudging is burning sage, and it's an energy. There's a lot of different energy cleansing rituals you can do. I mean, some people burn incense, which is a great one. Different types of sage. That's kind of a really basic one. Sometimes it's meditation, right? To go back within so that you're with yourself and you're not with all the energies of everything outside of you. For some people it's prayer. But, I'm quite a sociable person, but I'm also quite aware of how other people's energy affects me, so I keep to myself quite a lot. So, I'm the kind of person, if I walk into a room at an event, or even sometimes before I get in the room, I can feel what the energy of the room is. I can see where people have beef with each other, I can feel the tension. I can certainly see where people have beef with me, and they might not even know me, but I feel the judgment, I sense it. And so I try to protect myself from that by not going out too much or going into large groups that I don't know the people very well. So it's a lot of containment, and it's not finessed completely, to be honest, because I can't live like a hermit all the time. But I certainly have a spiritual practice that includes using sage, incense, prayer, meditation, and a reasonable amount of solitude.
So, the person that I see today, who's an empath, as a kid, did you feel the same kind of energy more at those very precarious points of childhood? Kids are off putting so much energy because they're still working out so much. Did you feel this, and were you affected by other people's energy?
Oh yeah, I mean, kids are naturally so intuitive and deeply empathic. I mean, we all are when we're born. A lot of us, lose the gift, in air quotes, because of our environment, because of what's being put on top of our natural intuition, right? Our intuition is our psychic gifts, essentially. Our ability to feel and see and read energy. And patriarchy, modern capitalism, modern governance, and just how whatever your parents' experience of childhood was as well, and their experience of the world, right, is what they bring to the environment you're raised in. So whatever limiting beliefs or whatever anxieties, whatever stress they might be going through, as a kid you can't help but notice it, you can't help but pick it up, and then you learn ways to, and this is, a lot of psychologists, even Gabor Mate, people like him, or Nicole Brett, people will tell us rightly that we then grow into, we adopt all of that stuff external to us, and it makes the adults we become, and then as adults we either do or do not do the work to undo all of that conditioning. But all that is to say, I grew up, well, even in my mother's womb, there is such a thing as just gestational, I think the word, gestational trauma. So because I was an unexpected pregnancy to two very young, poor immigrants, I wasn't necessarily promised to be born, right? And so even in the womb, there is this kind of early adaptation of worthiness, the question of worthiness, the question of abandonment, the question of rejection. And thankfully my mother, fought against her families. My mum was Irish Catholic and she was 17 when she had me, so it was not a joyous revelation that she was pregnant by a West African man. But she was determined to keep me, so that determination vibrates through me at the same time, right? And then I was born in, that being said, I was born in a convent for unmarried mothers, and most of the children born there were being given away for adoption. And I was, a baby amongst tens of maybe hundreds of other babies in cots, not necessarily being looked after very well because we were separated from our parents, our mothers, on purpose. So there was detachment. And so even as, that early detachment, when a baby's supposed to be very close to its mother, has an impact on you, right? And then not long after I was born, I was sent away to Ghana with some friends of my father's family, so strangers to me, strangers to my mum, And so there's like this sequence of being rejected, right? Because that's what a baby doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't understand that there's financial things happening in an adult world, or there's whatever limitations that are in the environment of your parents. What the ego of the baby is like, well, I should be the most important thing going on right now, and I'm not receiving the only thing that I need, which is the loving, caring attention of my mother, so there must be something wrong with me. And then that sets into place a whole trajectory of other things. But at the same time, because babies are so sensitive, I can remember even from being 3 or 4 years old, when I did come back to the UK, and being amongst the violence of my household, because my parents weren't meant to be together. And picking up on the energy, feeling scared, not just for myself but for my mother, or for just the general kind of safety, and that kind of added to developing empathy in a way, right? And then being 6, 7, and also being exposed to environments where there was a lot of violence and alcoholism in my mother's side of the family, and just a lot of different environments where the energy wasn't necessarily positive. I mean, it wasn't all negative, but there was a lot of negative energy going around. And as an intuitive child, I think I and we perhaps learn how to modify what it is we want or need in any situation in order to better fit the circumstances around us, and not add to the tension, and not add to the trouble, and not to be a problem, and not to want too much or expect too much, because essentially we know we're not going to get it, because we can see the environment, we can feel the environment, but also as a means of protection. And then from that you probably get into adulthood, then you get your anxious attachments, or your avoidant attachments, or whatever, you get abandonment issues, But at the same time, all that sounds quite negative, but at the same time it's just building up layers and layers and layers of more empathy. So the trick is, for me, has been, or the test, or the journey, has been to balance the empathy in knowing what other people need around me constantly with what I need for myself. And I think that's a challenge for most of us.
In that space so early, where did you find peace? Where was your happy place? Where was something that you remember fondly? Because it's complicated, that world, because they weren't prepared to give you exactly what you needed at that moment. But how did you find a way to navigate for your own peace in that time?
Yeah, I mean, for the very earliest years, I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't have a very great memory of being in Ghana and what that experience was like, but what I went on to do. I spent a lot of time inside myself, even as a kid. I lived in my head and in my imagination. I had an imaginary friend, for sure. And I learned to read at a really young age, because my dad was one of his best and worst qualities was his focus on education and academics. I mean, it went on to kind of quash my creative side, but I learned to read very, very young. So I was reading, actually, to be fair, my mum was also very, very important in that. We read together a lot when I was very small. And it was reinforced by my father quite a lot. So I read a lot, like I devoured books, even like kids' books I devoured, and then I went on to, I remember my first day at secondary school, I was reading Tolkien and D.H. Lawrence and all of that, and everyone rightly thought I was a geek, but I didn't care because I loved reading. Do you know what I mean? So my reading was always very advanced, so I was always lost in books, and that was certainly a very safe space for me, and creating worlds in my head.
Did you see yourself in those worlds, or did you just like having these other partners in crime and learn about their lives or their stories around them?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure that I was creating worlds, where I was situated in them necessarily. I think they were just better versions of, well, not better versions, but different versions of what world could look like. I mean, I remember being pretty young though, when I was like 8, about 7 or 8, almost manifesting, if you like, from that age, that I wasn't gonna have this experience again. Do you know what I mean? Like I was gonna build a life and a world for myself that wasn't gonna be anything like the world I was currently in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to make that decision with, like, it's such a, like, it's hope and something that's beyond that kind of lets you know that that's an option, because the world you see is usually the option we expect. We're gonna have a version of this. You're having a whole different where you're like, oh no, there's more, because I don't know who's behind these books. There's a moment that can be created for me.
Exactly.
And you, when it came to schooling, and how did you enjoy like the schooling in those years?
School was pretty hard for me because I was always, well, and I don't say this to sound arrogant, but I was more advanced than lots of other kids, so I stood out for that reason. And I was geeky, as in I liked books, and I wasn't really, I don't remember being a kid that liked playing that much, in the same, I guess, again, as a consequence of my environment and how I showed up in the environment. I was used to conversating with adults a lot from a very young age, and I was older than my years, so being around kids was difficult, I think, and also just from an identity perspective, like the first school I went to was in Deptford in South East London. Deptford is a very black community, and my mum was Irish and white, and I didn't, my dad was kind of in and out, and there was no kind of concrete extended family, to be honest. So there was like a culture happening at school that I didn't necessarily gel with or understand or couldn't access or fit into, which made me feel even more other and on the outside, right? Which is weird because I was like 5 or 6 at this point. It's not a point in time where you should feel ostracized from a community, but nonetheless I felt it. And then when we left Deptford to go to Woolwich, it was the inverse, right? It was a completely white environment. So I was on a council estate in Woolwich, surrounded by white people, and I didn't fit in there either, And I do remember asking my mum, I was about 6 or 7, and feeling confused about colour and race and what it meant. because there was a lot of racism still going. I mean, there's a lot of racism now, but very palpable racism was just out and unavoidable every day, even at school, even with the people you were in class with, And I remember saying to my mum, how come I'm not grey? Because you're white and dad's black. And I remember loving art at school as well. I loved drawing and I loved art. And that was like my other place. Like I used to make comic books when I was a kid. I used to like write comic books and I was obsessed with like Asterix. Not like the girly comics either. It was all like the very tomboyish comics. Buster, Beano, Asterix, all of those. Anyway, I used to write, make my own comics, and so this is where I guess the colour palette came in. But I wondered why I wasn't grey, because I didn't understand what it meant. Like, what does it mean to be white or black? And so that was challenging. And then honestly, those challenges continued because my mum, and this is not disparaging to her, but she carried with her her own inherent prejudices and racisms, right? Whether she was aware of it or not. And she had some, she'd had bad experiences with my dad and maybe his family, and because they had kidnapped me when I was a baby, and so she, she didn't have a lens of what black community was like beyond that, right? So she had some negative things to say about that. And so that was a challenge. It's like, oh, my mum, when you, my mum's a bit racist, but she's got black kids. But to her, she would then be like, I don't see colour, which is also harmful, even though she, was coming from a very well-intentioned place, right? Trying to make me feel like colour doesn't matter, but of course it mattered in a society where it's a division of rights, wealth, and everything that as an adult you go on to, go after. Anyway, so there was that, and then I had a tricky time at secondary school. Like primary school was fine because there was a handful of black kids and we all got on well together and it was good, but it was a very white school. It was like a Roman Catholic primary school. But race wasn't so much of a highlight there, but I remember going to secondary school and being the nerdy, weird, I was just different. Not necessarily in bad ways, but I was just different. I had a different energy. I cared about different things. And there was a very big black population in the years above me, and I was like so thirsty for access to it, It's like, oh wow, like to me all those older kids were like gods and goddesses. But all my friends were white, and I got bullied for that, I got the whole coconut thing, which had an impact, and it makes it harder to get in there, The more you're being rejected, the less you want to have anything to do with it, kind of thing. So that was tough to navigate in my teens. And because of, there was strange, wonderful things happening in my home life, like my dad was in and out of prison, or, I'd have the police turning up on the doorstep in the morning wanting to raid the house, and I'm trying to get my sister ready for school. And it's all stuff I couldn't talk about, or I was actively told not to talk about, obviously, and actively told, at one point I was told to lie about my dad being dead at a certain point, because I don't know why actually, but it made me more insular because I couldn't really be myself with anybody or talk, like nobody knew what was going on in my life, And so there was always like this boundary around me. I mean, I was friends with everybody. There was not really a reason for anybody to not be friends with me because I'm very friendly. But nobody knew me, and nobody knew what was going on in my world beyond school. And I was academically gifted, so I could fly under the radar pretty much. There was no reason for anybody to worry or have a concern. But yeah, the race thing had a big impact on me, I think, and then especially to college as well. Then again, that was next level because you got into a situation where everybody has defined themselves on ethnic terms in a way. Like you go into the canteen and one side's black and one side's white, and it's like, whoa, that's heavy. And again, it was that thing of me trying to, I guess, fit in, but having not grown up with in black culture, I was always going to be an outsider. Do you know what I mean? And then the more I gravitated to, my black community, then my white friends felt some type of way about it, Never necessarily voiced, but felt, So all of that was very challenging. But all along the way, interestingly, I was always kind of looking out, I've always been a person that attracts freaks and geeks and nerds as friends because we see each other, right? So all along, whilst I was going through whatever I was going through, navigating through school, I was still always the defender of the people who were getting bullied or yada yada. I was less likely to be bullied because I still had a voice and I was tall. I was pretty, I suppose, not in a conventional way. Nobody was looking at me like that at school, but I don't know, I feel like I had a certain kind of respect from my peers, and because, again, I was smart, so nobody was bullying me, in my year groups and things like that directly. So I was always, championing the people who were being picked on or trying to stick up for them and stuff like that. That's because I felt what they were going through, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I wanna find out how those two people, your parents, met. How does this two worlds collide to create you? Because they seem like there's something about not understanding how anti-blackness could occur without knowledge of it, and that's for sure. But still being attracted to a person of that's attraction and sexuality is a whole different thing. But how did these two people collide, and what is their story that got them to meeting up and trying to create a world together because they had to?
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. I've spent a lot of time ruminating on that over the years as an adult. And in dismay as a kid, honestly. It's how did you two meet? But, they both have really interesting stories. My mum, like I said, she's a very, very small outpost of a very small town in a very, very far west of Ireland. It's so remote. It's called Snarv in Bantry. It's beautiful there. But it's it's almost like she grew up in another version of time, very parochial, and her mother, my grandmother was a strict Roman Catholic, rosary every day, twice a day, a lot of mass, a lot of praying, a lot of judgment, and a lot of guilt, obviously, because that's what Catholics are best at. But she left. My mum used to walk to school barefoot, and the walk to school was like a couple of miles up a mountain, and the school had like maybe 12 kids in the class, that kind of life. And she left school when she was 14, and she came to England when she was 14, lied about her age so she could get work, worked in hotels, like worked in the Savoy, and she was a chambermaid, basically. And my aunt, who's a few years older than her, was already here doing a similar thing, but I think working in like pubs and stuff. So they lived together. I'm sure they were having a fun time for a couple of years. And my dad, more kind of, he grew up in Mamprobi and Accra, a bit more of a middle class existence. Very smart, very well educated. Very well educated and very smart man, boy. He won the Commonwealth Writing Prize. For people that don't know, Ghana used to be part of the Commonwealth. And he won the Commonwealth Writing Prize, like an essay, and the prize was a trip to London. And so he got to come to London, I think, when he was, 14 or 15, something like that. He stayed with a relative, and when he came back to Accra, it was a completely different world to Accra in the early 70s. And my grandmother told me that he said that he was going to finish school and go to London and, make his life in London. And that's what he did. He didn't go to university in Ghana. He left school as soon as he could and went to London. But, they were both, I guess, very naive about what that would actually look like. A bit like me when I came to New York, very naive. But, it was in a time, like just in the 60s, with just recent, and they both, the UK was very racist then. It was really still very palpably racist, even against Irish people, because of the Troubles and the IRA and England's. The UK just loves to go around the world taking over other people's shit, right? So there was a lot of tension there, and it was signposts were like no blacks, no Irish, and no dogs. So, and that was like for hotels, bars, pubs, and the rest of it. And so Irish people, and the majority of the African population in London at the time was West African, like the Nigerian or Ghanaian, and they were all ghettoised. So places they were ghettoised were, one of the places was Kilburn, which is where they were both living, and they met at a disco in Kilburn, and they won a dancing competition, and that's how they met. But that night was dancing. I'm pretty sure probably conceived me that night, and it was a very fast romance, and they got married with nobody's permission. My mum got married in this amazing red dress. Oh no, that was later. They didn't get married. I think I was at the wedding actually. Sorry, I think that was a bit later. But anyway, all that's to say, that's where they met in Kilburn, but that's what the circumstances. In Kilburn, at a disco, they met and fell in love, I guess.
Okay, let's go forward. So you embarked in university, am I correct? And
Yes.
how was that experience, and which university did you go to, and what were you trying to study?
Wow. Interestingly, or maybe not, well, it is what it is. I wanted to study English language and literature because all I ever wanted to do was write books, be a journalist, or whatever I wanted to do as a kid. It was around writing. But again, my father's influence was, and it's normal for like strict West African immigrant parents. They want you to be a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, or a profession that has some weight. You know, I had the acumen for it. There was a part of me that wanted to, like, I could have been a lawyer because I was good at arguing, I was good at debating, I was good at those things. So it wasn't like a million miles away that I would have done law, but there was a lot of pressure on me to study law, and that's what I ended up studying at university. But my dad wouldn't let me. There was also a lot of pressure on me to apply for like the Red Brick. So even though, so there's this weird conflict in my education where my mum left school at 14 and didn't really have much of a care about education. When I was 16, she was like, okay, now it's time to go and get a job. And also when I was 11, we have something in the UK called the 11 plus test, which is like, I guess it's like your SATs or something, except, you know, if you pass this test then you can go to grammar school, and then that's like a trajectory, right? Grammar school, yada yada, kind of, you get sent into a world of like money and wealth and connections, and it changes the course of your life, potentially. But my mum didn't even really understand what a grammar school was. And I had the choice of whether or not, basically I got the highest results in the whole, definitely the whole school, I think maybe the whole region, like the whole school district or something. And so they were like, do you want to go to grammar school? And I was like, I knew that I should because of what the opportunity would afford me. But also it's like, because I was already different, I didn't want to be more different in a new space. And I didn't want to be separated from my friends, like all this stupid kid stuff. And so I didn't go to grammar school. But then, you know, all throughout my academic career, I did very well, apart from my A-levels, but there were circumstances around that. But anyway, there was a lot of pressure on me to apply for Oxford and Cambridge and places like that. And again, it was like, well, I know what that would afford me, but I don't know if I want to be a part of it, and you know, what would that mean for who I became? I don't know. Maybe there was a bit of subconscious sabotage going on there. In the event, I applied to law at like King's and all of like the good universities in London, and also Sussex, because my dad didn't want me to leave London. He was adamant that I was not leaving London. So I really wanted to go to Sussex because I wanted to get out of London. But in the event, I didn't get the grades to get into it. Well, I did get into Sussex, but I didn't get into King's or the other places. And I decided at the time, and I was like, right, fuck it. I never wanted to do that anyway. So I kind of rejected the idea of going to university. And I didn't want to, I was very like in teenager mode, even though I was 18. And I was trying to reject everything. And I went to Ireland for the summer. And my dad, when I got back, my dad had applied through clearing. There's a process called clearing where you like sift through universities who will accept the grades you've got. Anyway, he enrolled me into the University of Greenwich to do law, which I really didn't want to do. And like, it was a former polytechnic and there was a lot of snobbery around that. But then I thought, well, what else am I going to do right now? So that's what I did. I went to the University of Greenwich to study law. It turned out to be an amazing 3 years of my life. But that's what I did. I did law.
And what made that such a good experience for you?
I think it's one of those, it was the first time in my academic career where I felt like myself was okay, as in, or at least a version of who I was being, was accepted in a way that wasn't, like, I wasn't really hiding anymore, like behind anything, or I wasn't hiding who I was just being myself. And it turned out that it was okay, you know? And part of that is from, and this is why university is so good, is because you are exposed to so many different types of people from around the world, from different levels of life and all of that. So it just unlocked that for me, which I had, you know, when you grow up where I grew up, you grow, you know, the school system keeps you, unless you go to grammar school, unless you, you know, break out of the environment, you're constantly with the same types of people, right, with the same types of ambitions and the same types of perspectives and so on. So I had always felt quite limited by all of that, because I felt and thought differently to lots of other people in those groups. And then in university, I realised, oh, there are more people out there who think like me, or who feel like me, or who can share my perspective. And if they don't, they can, you know, it doesn't mean rejection if they don't agree with me. It's just like, there's just another point of view. Do you know what I mean? So there was that, and I got a lot of encouragement from some really good tutors who believed in me. And I met some really great friends. And, you know, I moved out of home. So I got my, you know, got my true independence, and I guess I just started to become who I was going to be. I guess that was the thing.
So after the 3 years in university, what was the next step? What did you expect to do, and what did happen to you after?
Yeah, I mean, I was, you know, there was this expectation that I would be a barrister. Again, because my communication and just debating skills and yada yada. And there was a very small, tiny part of me that wanted to do that. But again, there was this understanding of what that world was like, and whether or not whether my soul could be a part of that world. Do you know what I mean? And ultimately, I knew that it couldn't. And there were practical reasons as well, like, you know, there's just, again, very white, very male, very old male world, where I would be so in contrast to that environment. I just knew how hard it would be and how unlikely it would be that I would succeed in a way that I wanted to. So I didn't really push for that. I did try, I mean, law in general, like, I had this real sense of justice and like wanting to help people and you know, be on the right side of the good fight. But I also had this super awareness that, well, that means, you know, working on the side that's underpaid and overworked without much progress. So I kind of felt nah about it. And, you know, I took a job straight after uni I trained as a paralegal for a minute. But I was, you know, offices, filing, it's not my bag. I knew that pretty quickly, so that didn't last. And then I allowed it to kind of stop with that, like the idea of law. Because I'd already committed in my head before I started that course that, well, it's not what I want to do, but it's a good degree, it's a well-respected degree. And it's kind of a degree that it didn't matter what I did afterwards, people would acknowledge it as having weight. So I could do anything I wanted pretty much with a law degree. And so I guess that's the attitude I had when I left. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to practice law. And I just bounced around a lot. out for the next 10 years, not really having a good sense of where I was going, to be honest, but just trying to, you know, on one level, earn enough money to survive, but doing so, at least trying to have fun while I was doing it, you know. So any job I took, if it wasn't fun, if I wasn't enjoying it, I didn't last very long. Even if I was good at it, even if I was capable. I mean, and I was in the lucky position that, you know, I got every job I applied for. You know, I got jobs as like a probation officer in prison, and I was like, do I want to do that? Nah. I got a job as the editor of a consumer magazine, and I was like, do I want to do that? Nah, you know. So I kept applying for like quite serious jobs, getting them, and then being like, no, it's not what I'm about, or it's not, like, I just knew that it didn't deeply resonate with me, even if on paper it looked good. So I didn't do it. So I ended up doing a lot of, you know, facile, silly things for a while, but places where I could meet people. I did a lot of sales jobs, which I was very good at, selling things. While I was still in London, a lot of telesales. And then I moved to Brighton, and then that opened up a whole new other world, really, and that kind of opened up a more kind of creative world, because, well, just inherently because of what Brighton's like, and it's, you know, they call it the graveyard of ambition, but there's certainly a lot of artists there, and there's a lot of music there, and there's a lot of creative people there, kind of just living and doing their whatever it is they do. And so for 10 years in Brighton, that's what I was doing, you know. I had moved there with the intention of starting a record label with some friends, because I was very passionate about music. That didn't go anywhere too fast. And then I ended up, I did also, in that time, you know, I did so many different, I was a cinema usher with a law degree. I worked on Brighton Pier, I did telesales, I worked as a copy editor for a where to stay guide, I planted trees on highways, I don't know, like every kind of conceivable job you can imagine I did. And where I kind of started to settle or find comfort or peace was in the most simplest job of just, I worked for a company called Swap Marketing, where I was like an event promoter, really, but it wasn't even that grand to begin with. I was literally just putting up posters and flyers for events that were happening in and around Brighton, which meant I got to walk loads every day, which meant I got to like know Brighton like the back of my hand, because it was great exercise. I love walking, I still love walking. I got to meet loads of people on my routes, so I was constantly being engaged with, again, all of these different types of people, because they're all different types of venues and different types of cafes, and so they have different types of customers and owners. So, and sometimes I'd just be standing in the middle of, you know, Sydney Street and across street and handing out flyers to like, you know, just hundreds of people every day, talking to people. And it was a lot of fun, and it was paid cash. It's always a winner. But then from that, I went on to work a bit in the office of that company, and then I started, but also I was going to the events I was promoting, which was great as well. I was getting in for free, bonus. So I was going to a lot of music and dance and theatre and comedy shows, living my best life, really, to be honest. And then I started to work, I saw an ad there was this guy who used to work for NME, he used to be the editor of New Musical Express. He lived in Brighton, and he was doing a journalism course for young offenders or kids that had been in Borstal, things like that. And I just saw the advert and I was like, oh, I mean, it was very part-time. I was like, that looks interesting. So I applied to do that. I got the job. So I was helping him teach these kids how to write and how to mock up magazines and make their own magazines, and that was a lot of fun. And then from that I started reviewing the events that I was going to. Then I started the NCTJ because I thought, oh, maybe journalism's a thing. This was all happening simultaneously. So then I was, started writing for The Insight, which is like a local liberal paper, doing their reviews, and then I did the NCTJ, and then I started doing features for them, feature writing. And that's when I kind of lost, I was writing for lots of periodicals in Brighton at the time, or review sites and review listings, but the combination of doing the NCTJ and then doing feature writing for like a proper paper quashed my passion for journalism pretty quickly because I realised that it wasn't really about the story that you saw, it was more about, feeding the overall narrative of the publication and or satisfying advertisers and what they wanted to say about something. So, and also the course, I had one tutor in particular was really, I guess he was very jaded is a good word, and he did not paint a good impression of what the industry would be like once you're an actual working journalist in London. So I guess I got quite disillusioned with that, and instead I started my own event promotion company because I was doing it anyway. Actually, I met somebody called Laura Duchesky, who was an event promoter, who's super creative and also very spiritual. And so she kind of unlocked this spiritual creative side to me, and she's the person who said to me, this is what you should be doing. It's like, look, why don't you do your own events? So that's what I did, started doing my own events. So I was putting on live music nights, I was getting bands to do stripped down versions of their own, more loud versions of their sets. Then I was working for Brighton Music Festival, meeting bands and things like that. Then I became a band manager for a period. But at the same time, in the background, my personal life was chaos. I was doing loads of drugs, drinking loads. Initially, I was in a very abusive relationship, physically and emotionally, and when that ended I kind of just went into this chaos mode because I'd never really come out. I didn't come out at school, I didn't come out really till I was at university, and I locked into a relationship for the majority of university, so I never really had those years where you're playing the field. So when I came out of that long-term relationship in Brighton, I guess I went crazy a little bit, and it was just like being a teenager, which was very chaotic and messy and dangerous, honestly. But it was all happening simultaneously. It felt very I felt very alive, but also still really unfulfilled, and knowing that this wasn't the version of my life I was supposed to be living necessarily. And I was, starting to hit 30, so Saturn's return crept in and was like, what are you doing with your time and your life? And I got drawn back to London, or I was being drawn back to London. And so I applied for a job. This is 10 years after university. And I had no real jobs in between. As I said, I had all of these crazy, weird little small random jobs. I applied for a job as a PR assistant for a technology company. And then kind of was like, why did I apply for that? I don't want that job. And the person this person will probably go on record as being the best manager I've ever had, and maybe ever will have, because I'm never going to have a manager again. But she insisted on meeting me, even though I didn't want to come up for the interview. And I told her that I was running some venues for the Great Escape, which is a music festival. She said, "Oh, great! I'm coming to Brighton for the Great Escape." Anyway, we ended up hanging out all weekend and having a good time. And so she said, "You must come and interview." And I was like, "Okay, I will." So I went to the interview, and it wasn't a stuffy office, but it was a lot of tech bros. So I wasn't hugely enamoured with the environment, but the location was great because it was East London, which is where I would want to be if I moved back to London. Anyway, I went into the interview, met her boss, Mikkel, who was a little bit intimidated by me, I think, which is kind of funny. But I walked out of the interview as, instead of basically I went in applying for a PR assistant, and I walked out with a job as a PR manager and an extra 10k salary or something like that. And I felt very good about myself. And then that's what I did next for a minute. Very strange trajectory. But she was great because she could see that, I wasn't really qualified, but whatever qualification means, right? But it's what I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, which is, selling my own events, PRing my own events, PRing a band, PRing other people's events and stuff. But she could see my energy and my aptitude, and that I was smart and easily teachable. So she had a lot of faith in me, and she gave me a lot of room to be myself in a job that really didn't suit me. So I'm always grateful to her for that, actually. She was a good manager. And then there's, after that, basically YouTube happened, and this company got blown out of the water by YouTube. So I got made redundant, and I always forget the sequence here, but I'm pretty sure. I went travelling. I started a video production company with some friends who were all fine artists, and we made fashion videos, idents, and music videos, basically internet brand promos. That was the idea, but that was a fashion film kind of eye, so they were edgy and cool, and that was fun for a minute on Unit 10 Productions. Then I did some freelancing for an experiential marketing company, as a project manager. And then I got a job as an online editor for an air sports media company. And that job took me around the world filming air sports competitions, which was very unusual and fun. And that job eventually allowed me, I went freelance for them, and that's when I went to America. I went traveling around America for 3 months on Amtrak, having the best time exploring the United States. And when I got back was when I started, well, it's not when I started Zoe's Ghana Kitchen, but it was almost like within a month of getting back. There was a festival in my neighbourhood in Hackney Wick called Hackney Wicked, and at the time, Hackney Wick was basically an industrial landscape, so there was nothing there for people to do or eat, or there was no bars or anything yet. It hadn't been gentrified at all. And so thousands of people were coming into this neighbourhood for open studios, and my apartment was being used as an open studio. So I decided to set up a little stall outside my front door and make a pot of peanut butter stew and fry some plantain and sell it to people. And my friends made a sign saying Zoe's famous peanut butter stew. And we made like these Palme d'Or flyers as fake reviews. So funny. Like the tastiest thing. The tastiest African food you're ever gonna eat. Anyway, before I knew it, I had a queue of people outside this alleyway, like down this alley, queuing for my peanut butter stew, and it created this party outside my house. Vibe. It was a nice vibe. And that's the story of how Ghana Kitchen began.
So, when you started cooking, that was just an organic thing that you just always liked cooking?
I had always cooked because I had always cooked. Well, I grew up with a lot of like communal food, like on the Irish side, because we had a very nuclear family in London. It was just me, my mum and my sister pretty much, and occasionally my dad. But it was a big family in Ireland, so cooking was always a lot of people, and all of the women were in the kitchen, participating in that process, feeding the men. It was very patriarchal. And I'd always, food as it pertains to Ghana was only ever originally through my dad, obviously, because he's Ghanaian. But he would used to cook for himself initially. It was a very selfish act. But I could see in it that it was very like meditative, and like I could see that it took him somewhere that wasn't where he was, He was traveling when he cooked that food and ate that food. And so it became a way for me, my relationship with the food became a way to have a relationship with him in a way. So that's what piqued my interest originally. My mum went on to keep cooking that food, but I wasn't not used to cooking for myself, because when I was 13, my parents split up. My mum and my sister moved out. I ended up staying in the house with my dad. And my dad wasn't really there. So, I was basically by myself. So I cooked for myself. I cooked for my dad when he was around. And I cooked for like friends. Well, just one friend in particular, really, Lisa Nelson. He also had like a bit of an interesting home life. So we used to hang out together. So I was used to cooking regularly in that sense. And then, but also as a form of like nurture. So whenever I lived with people, like at university and beyond that, like I often cooked for like everybody in the household. And I liked cooking. I did like cooking, but it certainly wasn't something I considered myself particularly gifted at or skilled at, or it's just something I liked to do because food's nourishment, and food was a really easy way to show love and caring and perhaps show emotions I might not have been comfortable vocalizing. So food was a good medium for that. And in the course of those, and that particular dish was just something that I would always cook because it was my favourite dish. So all of my friends had experienced it at some point or another, and everybody loved it. So I knew it was going to be a winner.
So after that one moment where there was a line and people were queuing for it, what made you make the next step of doing more of this, or like actually embracing the idea of cooking for others?
Yeah, it took quite a while for me to consider. That was just a moment in time, right? It was like an opportunistic moment to earn some money. It happened to also create a really nice social environment, and it happened to also create a safe space for people to ask a lot of questions about the food and where it came from. And it also happened to create an interest in people to want to experience it again. So that was all beyond my control, right? I just turned up to make some money that day. So I didn't have any great intention beyond that. But all those other circumstances that happened around it made me consider, well, that's interesting. But it still wasn't something I wanted to do around it. So nothing happened for a year until the next weekend of that festival came around a year later. And because it had been so much fun and piqued so much interest, we decided to turn the apartment into a pop-up restaurant for the weekend instead of an open house, instead of a gallery. We went to town, like we made and built tables and chairs out of recycled wood and found around the place, and I went to charity shops and bought lots of second-hand plates and tableware and cutlery, and went to the African market, bought loads of fabric, and I made a playlist, Zoe's Ghana Kitchen. I hired bain-marie stations and things like that. So people came in to that space and believed they were in a restaurant, and it was packed for 3 days solid, with also queues around. It was crazy busy. And I just collected, at the end, people were trying to book for next week, 2 weeks, and I was like, I'm sorry, this is just a one-off, but I'll take your email address, and if I do it again, I'll let you know. And because it had been so much fun, I wouldn't say it was hugely profitable, but it made money. Not a lot of money, because I didn't know. I wasn't in like an entrepreneur mindset, I wasn't trying to charge people what they should have been being charged, to be honest. But it was a lot of fun to do, and it made some money. So it started to in the back of my mind be like, oh, this is an interesting way to make money, but still not with any real seriousness or fervour behind it. And then I think I did a couple of them like that again over the course of the next 6 months. And I was starting my MA at Goldsmiths when I finally got back to the creative, to the 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old Zoe who wanted to write. I was taking a creative leap. In fact, I was doing the PACE course, which is like an entry course to the MA. Anyway, during that year, I decided to focus on writing, and Ghana Kitchen supplemented my income for that year. And then I started the MA. And Ghana Kitchen, in that time, had kind of exploded because very organically through blogs and it started to get pressed, and I was in the Evening Standard for like funding my MA by cooking. And by the end of my MA, there was a substantial amount of press behind, like I was known for doing this. And so it becomes something that I was doing underground in my living room and had to like stop because that's illegal. And the nature of it changed a bit over that time, but also in the middle of all of that, I went around Europe with my friends on the course from Goldsmiths, travelling around, you know, trying to be very bohemian and live the Writerly life. And it was a lot of fun, and we ended up in Berlin, and we were supposed to be in Berlin. I was supposed to be in Berlin for like 3 days, and I ended up staying for like, I don't know, a couple of months. And I was running out of money, so I was like, oh, I wonder if I could do a pop-up and, you know, make some money to stay longer. So that's what I did. I borrowed a friend's apartment, Cat, and, you know, we borrowed tables and chairs and basically did again what I had done in my home in London. Not quite the same scale, but. And I just invited people from everywhere. Every time I went to a cafe or a bar, or I was outside, I was like, oh, I'm doing this event, you should come. And it was, anyway, the event happened, it was lovely, it was full of people I didn't know or I'd met once. And a few weeks later I was back in London, back on the course, and my inbox was exploding all of a sudden with inquiries from Germans trying to book for Ghanaish Kutchen, they were saying. I was like, what is this? But one of the guests at that dinner had been the editor of Tip Berlin, which is the equivalent of Time Out. And she'd written a really lovely review of the dinner and the event, and so now all of these Germans were wanting to book. So I was like, amazing, this gives me reasons to go back to Berlin, and also a way to pay for it. So I was having my dream life, honestly, going back and forth between London and Berlin, doing supper clubs and pop-ups, and writing, you know, doing the MA. After the MA finished, I decided I was going to move to Berlin. In the meantime, of course, I fell in love with somebody, which was a little minor spoke in the wheel. But I moved anyway, and I took a kitchen residency in Neukölln at the Werkstatt der Kulturen. And for the time I was there, you know, crazy press from Germany then started descending, like DW TV came down, a couple of other TV stations. I did interviews in German press. I don't even know the names of some of them, honestly. At the same time, you know, it was exploding in London, so I was coming back and forth to do catering. And I wasn't doing anything else. Like, I had moved to Berlin to be a writer and cook sometimes. And what had happened was I wasn't writing anything and I was cooking everywhere. I even went to Russia to cook as an artist as part of an art exhibit. It's crazy. Crazy in the best ways. But I just kept saying yes because that's what my intuition was telling me. You know, I was just following my intuition. Okay, I'll do this. The universe wants me to do this. I'll do this, I'll do this. But anyway, I came back from Berlin, I guess, in 2013-ish. And I was like, okay, because I was being drawn to come back, it didn't make sense to be doing this back and forth business. And then at that point, I had to decide what was going on. So I was like, why does the universe want me to do this? And I wrote, I guess, you know, literally on the back of a fag packet, I wrote a business plan of like what it was, what it could be, and why it needed to exist. And I decided that, okay, like, what's the function I'm doing? I'm bridging a gap in people's knowledge. I'm kind of bringing it to a wider audience and dispelling some negative stereotypes around African foods. And I felt okay about that. So I thought, yeah, I can get behind this mission. And then it became a mission. And so once it's a mission, it was like pedal to the metal. And I just didn't stop saying yes for the next, 13 years, I guess. And before I knew it, I had a catering company, I had a street food business, I had a restaurant in Brixton, I had a cookbook. I had a lot of, press in America and the UK for bringing this cuisine to a wider audience. And then it kind of got out of my control pretty quickly. And I think it kind of stopped being fun. Like between 2010 and ironically, when the cookbook launched, that year of it launching, obviously I got lots of PR and press and I was very visible, but I wasn't getting a lot of personal reward from that. And I felt like, suddenly I felt, whether it was true or not, or how others perceived it or not, it felt like I was now in competition after having spent the last 7 years in my own world kind of thing, doing my own thing, having fun. Suddenly I found myself in competition in an industry that I knew nothing about, and like nothing resonated with me. I was not networked. I hadn't been to culinary school, so I wasn't like a chefy chef. I was a home cook. I mean, I still am a home cook. And there's lots of devils that come with that, right? So I guess I had to I was fighting imposter syndrome. I was trying to claw back my authenticity, which I felt was draining from me a bit, because I was in a lot of white spaces, white powerful spaces, where I was being asked quite a lot to just change, right? It's not like it's not people directly saying, "Oh, you need to change." It's very subtle how it happens, And sometimes it is direct. Sometimes it's like, "Oh, you can't use that ingredient because people aren't going to know what it is, or they're not going to know where to get it, or whatever it is." So I don't know. I was going through a battle, I guess. And in 2018, I had a bit of a breakdown, because I'd taken on too much. I was under a lot of financial stress and pressure. I wasn't happy in what I was doing. I was saying yes to everybody, even when I didn't want to do it, or when I didn't have capacity to do it, because I was trying to keep up with the momentum that had been created. And then 2019 came around and I ended up in hospital. Hang on. Yeah, I did. At the end of September 2019, when festival season finished, I ended up in hospital in intensive care for 5 days. And the doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. Originally they thought I had meningitis. I did all kinds of tests, like lumbar punctures, kidney, bloods, every conceivable test they could do, they did on me. And they couldn't find out what it was, the thing. But I knew what it was. I was exhausted, and my soul was just like, had enough of whatever was happening. It's like, you're not doing this anymore. And it just, the universe will do that to you. If you're going too fast and far in the wrong direction, it will just plonk you in a bed for 5 days and be like, you need to stop, have a think, get quiet, go within. So that's what I did. But interestingly, those bookmarks for me are very interesting, because I consider, the beginning of Ghana Kitchen coincided with the beginning of my creative life. That's how I think of it, or the acceptance of my creative self. And then the ending, so I call that a spiritual awakening. And then the ending of it, which the ending started in 2019, if you like, was also a spiritual awakening. And for me it was like Ghana Kitchen was the gift the universe gave me to. It was like the next quantum leap into my authenticity, right? As in, I created a platform, Zoe's Ghana Kitchen, where I could be creative and have a platform to communicate in my own voice, telling my own story. So it was all completely rooted in my own identity. Do you know what I mean? It didn't matter if X, Y, and Z rejected me, because it's my truth. You can't unwrap or undo what my truth is. Do you know what I mean? And I wasn't trying to speak for anybody but myself. I mean, lots of other people put that on me, but I wasn't trying to do that. So it was this beautiful gift of, okay, do this for a minute so you can get the confidence in who you are and get some platform and profile so people get to know who you are. But then it was like, okay, you've done too much. You wasn't supposed to do it this way or for this long, you know? Time's up. You need to change course now. What have you learned in that time? And I learned a lot. And in all of that learning, and then in 2020, I started Black Book, which was a platform to, honestly, it was a platform to highlight everything I had learned in that period of time in hospitality, and how hospitality and food media treats people of colour, and how it interacts with people of colour. And, you know, a forum for people to have that conversation, but also to try and protect people and help them navigate through an all mostly white world, right? Especially if you're cooking from your culture and people are putting labels on you and people are trying to homogenize you when your gift is the opposite of being homogenous, you know what I mean? Anyway, and there was supposed to be a new iteration of Ghana Kitchen. And there was, and there is, I guess. The pivot was an e-commerce platform that became unavoidable because of the pandemic. So the pandemic just sped everything up in a way. But yeah, that's how I got into cooking for a living. And that's what